Hi everybody, it's Mark Sage with our latest area, Fireside Chat. Our Fireside Chats are speaking to the industry experts just to find out what's going on, how they're seeing the industry and provide an update to you, the listeners. Today, I'm really excited to have Eric from ABI Research. Eric and I have known each other for a long time. He is renowned as one of the leading experts and insightful people. So Eric, perhaps just quickly introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, and thanks for having me. Yes, I'm Eric Abbruzzese, Research Director with ABI Research. ABI is a global tech intelligence firm. My specialty is in augmented and virtual reality, extended reality now that we're calling it, hardware, software, and service, and sort of everything in between. I've been with ABI for over 10 years now, just past 10 years, late last year, and came out of a background at university in human computer interaction and gamification. So sort of jumped right into from psych first research with some tech to tech first research with ABI.
Fantastic. And congratulations on making 10 years.
Thank you.
So Eric, let's just talk about, I know you have a wide range of knowledge and expertise, but let's just start with who are the major players in XR today, and how has that changed over the last few years?
Yeah, it's been both quiet and the opposite of quiet in XR the past few years. It's been very, very up and down. The latest big name to talk about is probably Google. Android XR was officially announced end of last year, sort of quietly with a developer first approach to it. More recently, the acquisition of HTC IP and employees and talent going into Google. So they're the newest, let's call them newest big name in the space. It's a little too early to make assumptions on what the full Google ecosystem will look like. Samsung and Qualcomm are major partners. Samsung's product Muhan is the first official device. There are new devices coming in the future, and we'll sort of see what they look like. Google's unique in that they're a major tech player. They have experience in a huge swath of technology, and very specifically in XR with AR and VR. Google Glass was a thing in enterprise very successfully for years. So they've learned some lessons for the better part of a decade with Google Glass. They've got a Pixel lineup with their own hardware. They're working on chips. They were working on VR, and now they're partnering with Samsung for VR, and maybe there'll be some Google Direct activity going forward. So, and they have the Android operating system, which is really the other half of the tech market, if you call Apple the other half of it. So they are one of the most complete players in the space. So you have to speak to them in that regard. The other big name would be Meta. Meta dominates the virtual reality market with Meta Quest. It's basically best in class, best in price. Most people seem to agree. There's certainly other players in the space with hardware. They tend to focus either on lower cost than Meta or more capable than Meta. Vario being an ultra capable, really enterprise focused VR headset, and something like Pico maybe targeting both lower cost and more competitive, directly competitive with Meta. But Meta also has the Horizon OS, so they're fighting on the operating system line. They have tons of work going on in AI, open source and closed source. So we see quite a bit going on there with Meta. They have an enterprise domain and with Quest for Business. So they're, I would say, on equal footing to some of the big names. And then Apple is in the conversation with Vision Pro, but obviously it's been winding down. Apple's real interest and power in XR is whatever might be next, and we don't know that yet. But they've done a good job of building out a software ecosystem and, more importantly, a development ecosystem. So they should be able to hit the ground running with whatever might be next for them. We don't know what it is, but those are the three big names. And then there's some vendors in the enterprise space that have been around for a little while and aren't at the scale of those big three, but are still notable. I would give credit to Lenovo here. They're sort of an enterprise focused player. They've done a good job of understanding what enterprise customers want. So they have VRX on the VR side, and they're launching new smart glasses as well. So Lenovo's positioned quite nicely. Microsoft is a question mark. I should add them as well. You know, they had HoloLens. There's some HoloLens customers that are sort of questioning where to go. There's not a clear pathway forward. There's players like DigiLens, Vuzix, RealWear that are operating in a similar enterprise XR hardware domain, but obviously don't have the Microsoft footing and background that Microsoft does. So there's a little bit of a question mark there that we'll see how it goes. There's rumors that Microsoft might return to hardware in the future through like a Samsung partnership, but it's nothing more than rumors right now. We'll see where that goes. So Microsoft currently sits mostly on the software side. They still have Dynamics, Guides, and Mesh, I guess, is their big three competitive enterprise XR software pieces. And we'll see how much activity and interest they push into those going forward.
Yeah, no, thank you, Eric. I think it's really interesting. We're certainly doing some work from an area perspective on the Android XR platform, just to see if it's enterprise focused or those enterprise elements in it. So, you know, what I'm really pushing and with our members is to get those to really understand what the security issues are, which is often the issue about deploying Android devices. So, yeah, more to come, but I think that's a really good, and thank you for that kind of overview of where we are with the XR players. Certainly from a hardware perspective. Let's kind of take it even further higher than that and a kind of helicopter view and ask you about what are the kind of broader ecosystem elements relevant to enterprise XR?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned security, so I guess I can start there. Security and privacy are not specific to enterprise, but perhaps are more justly focused on than in the broader consumer space, especially if you're working with sensitive information or in sensitive environments. That's something you need to keep an eye on. And XR is unique versus other device types in that for most applications, there's a camera involved, whether it's for machine vision or for recording or for tracking of a headset, there's usually a camera. And so if we're now dealing with ubiquitous cameras, possibly always on cameras, that has to be integrated into a conversation around deployment. You know, where are these devices? What does the camera access look like from like a development and API standpoint? Can we shut that camera down if need be? What is it capturing? And where is that content going to? XR, like I said, is unique in having those cameras on board, and also in so far as really necessitating that data to function. Like I mentioned machine vision, it's not going to work without a camera on board. So if a use case depends on machine vision, whether it's for object recognition or verification of a task, something like that, you have this back and forth where this use case demands a camera, but does the deployment or the company demand, you know, an air gap device or a high security environment? Those two aren't going to work together. So it's another dynamic to consider when you're discussing a deployment, or if you're moving from, you know, one device to another. In the case of if you're moving from Microsoft to something new, well, Microsoft security protocol looks different to, you know, a RealWear protocol or DigiLens protocol. And you're bringing in new players. You know, you might bring in a systems integrator that you didn't have before. Accenture and Deloitte are pretty active in XR, so they can help those SIs. They can help with security and privacy, but their help doesn't remove the need for the conversation or the need for the awareness of where this device sits, what it's capturing, and where the data it captures goes. So that's true. And like you said, you know, very validly, Android is sometimes difficult to integrate. Android XR, will it be the same story? We don't know. It's too early to see really how it will play out, but it's something to watch for. Beyond security, I had mentioned a few times machine vision. So I would say machine vision and AI more broadly are sort of unmissable in terms of what we're discussing. You can separate AI and machine vision a bit. You know, machine vision just adds that visual element. AI doesn't intrinsically need a camera to function, but for especially in XR, most use cases will probably be machine vision driven. But it's really looking to tap into that unique data source, that spatial data, the camera data, the sensor data that an XR device can provide. Other devices perhaps can't, or it's not feasible to do so. And so now you have this new wealth of novel data from an XR device. So you're starting to bring in some of the AI vendors. I mentioned Meta and their open source efforts. That's an interesting conversation around what can sit on device for these versus in the cloud. And again, if you're going back into the cloud, security comes back into the conversation. So they all work together pretty intricately. One other element I'd mention that I'm hearing more often, but is still, I guess, early days, is regulation and funding. With today's economic environment and government environment, this is both a potential positive and negative for XR. A positive insofar as there can be government funding and grants and programs to support, a country's or a state's manufacturing efforts, sort of like the CHIPS Act in the United States a few years ago, and being able to supplement digitization efforts maybe in a certain environment. If you buy, X product or work with X company, that can positively impact adoption of XR. The other side of that coin is tariffs and regulation, possibly limiting it. If you're working globally, what does the political and economic environment dictate is possible, working with different partners and different companies. So that's one that's early days and fluctuating daily, hourly sometimes. So there's obviously no clear consensus on how to approach that. So wait and see there, but it is something that can trickle down and impact XR pretty directly.
Yeah, no, thank you, Eric. We've done some work again within the area around that kind of overlap or that intersection of AI and XR. And to your point, the kind of machine vision. But yeah, we're just at a very simple level. The AI helps tremendously with the content and the data, and then the XR is the visualization of that. But we're really keen on understanding the use cases and what problems are actually being solved, and more importantly, around some of those kind of ethics and other bits that you mentioned as well. So it's a high part of our kind of 2025 initiatives. Anyway, so going on to the last question, and I'm a big fan of this kind of question, any of the kind of talks I do. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what problems are being solved using XR? Okay, but also kind of around the return on investment. So what's the state of the kind of end user, end customer XR value as of today?
Yeah, that's actually something, I mentioned in the last question. Things are in flux quite a bit in the XR market. The value of XR has really not been in flux. It's been decently well understood for quite a while, and there's barriers above that in terms of integration and deployment. But at the user level, there is value in a number of pretty key use cases. I would say on the VR side, it focuses on visualization and interactivity. So VR training is probably the hero use case in VR. You are able to iterate content infinitely if you have a development platform and correct content creation platform where you can bring in relevant content, relevant 3D models or CAD files or whatever it may be, and adjust them with infinite variables for a certain training environment. And then you can measure performance in that VR training environment. That data cycles back, again, talking about the cyclical and related nature of all this stuff, can cycle into an AI data analytics platform and push out results and things to improve on and iterate on directly, in real time. That's a very valuable use case. But it really spawns out of the visual component, being able to immerse in an environment, whether it's factory floor or a retail store or something like that, being able to immerse there and interact with that content. That interactivity is key for VR training. And then there's maybe the other half of it that is less interactive and less visual, and that would be more on like the augmented reality side for something like work instruction or broadly data capture. So step-by-step instruction, I remember talking about 10 years ago was a key use case with smart glasses, and it remains one. The hands-free element maybe is one abstraction layer above that. Being able to have hands-free access to data is very valuable. And so something like a smart glass product delivers that perfectly. There is still interactivity, of course. Checking off the checklist is interactivity. It's a little less dynamic than one-to-one interaction in a space like VR would have, but there is still that interaction. And like voice and gesture control is very common for those smart glasses as well. But the true value, I would say, is the glanceable, more simplified information, being able to really not simulate a new environment, just sit on top of, assisted reality, it used to be called for a while, and still is in some areas. So that remains valuable, and it really boils down to the hands-free and robust amount of data you can get hands-free through something like AR work instruction. And then I mentioned briefly data collection. That is something that harkens back to access to a camera. You have a new device type that is accessing data constantly just to function in the case of spatial tracking. So can you leverage that data for something else? And the answer is obviously yes. And it's early days for some of the really complex spatial data analysis, something like a factory floor scan. And we've seen some early adaptations of that. But more commonly, it's stuff like verification. Step-by-step verification. You can use an AI machine vision assistant and verify hands-free. And so you're streamlining the workflow at the user level. You're also taking possibly a secondary expert out of the equation and saving their time and resources as well. So that remains maybe a little bit earlier days, but is showing great promise and pretty quick growth, especially as AI starts to or continues to grow pretty quickly as well.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Again, very insightful. We've just finished the area that is on a piece of research on the kind of, we called it the inspection use case. It's obviously done, but you do a piece of work, then AI kind of helps to make sure you've done it correctly, and there's a huge amount of savings potential with that as well. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So Eric, listen, thank you very much indeed for sharing your insights. I'd love to get you back again in the future, because as you said, it's a dynamic industry, but then often a lot doesn't happen. I thought it was really good when you started off the call on that, but I absolutely understand, and I think people involved in the industry understand what you mean. So thank you for your time and your insights. We really appreciate it. Thank you for the great work that you do for the ecosystem, and look forward to catching up with you in the not too distant future.
Likewise, thank you very much for having me.